Let's take an early look at the jet crash at Reno air races this year. The jet was an L-29 racing in the gold jet category on the last day of races. It had been a long week for the Reno air races, and the L-29 was in a race and in a tight heat with a competitor in the race for the overall trophy. The Reno air race itself is laid out in an oval track with several pylons that the racers have to race around. There are several rules that govern the races at Reno air races. There's some minimum altitudes they have to adhere to, and all the racers go through a racing school, commonly called the pylon racing school, before they're allowed to race on the course. In the L-29 crash, the L-29 was in a tight race with a competitor for the overall trophy. As it went into pylon number 5, the L-29 rolled out and went high on the outside of the turn. That's what the racers are taught to do when they have any kind of a problem. They roll out of the bank, clear their flight path, go to the outside of the turn and fly high. It's a climb to cope mechanism that all low altitude pilots learn. Anytime you experience any kind of problem, you climb to cope, get on the outside of the turn, reduce the G load, and get some time to think and assess your problem. It looks like that's what the L-29 did. It experienced some kind of problem in between pylon 4 and 5, and it moves to the outside of the turn as they're taught to do in the racing school. Whether or not he experienced wake turbulence, whether or not there was an engine problem, a flight control flutter, that's unknown at this stage, but what is known is it appears that he's moving to the outside in a deliberate fashion to assess some kind of an issue. From that point, it appears that he sets his bank and begins to attempt to re-enter the race. When he sets his bank, he pulls, and then there's a let-off of the pull and then a continuous glide into the desert floor where the airplane crashes and the pilot dies.
And we still got Hogue with the inside track, but boy, Steph Reedy's making a run on him.
Remember, these two finished 1/100th of a second apart in the penultimate gold race. That was yesterday on Saturday.
There they are, Tommy. They're trading positions out there. We see Hogue go high for the first time up there by the guide pylon. Now, I'm not sure what this... Oh, he's actually turning to the right, Tommy. We got a problem. He is something wrong with that airplane. I mean, he's in control, but he had to jump out and go around. Stav Reedy's has jumped way into the lead, and Hogue is falling back now, at least into third.
Oh, no.
There was a problem. Oh, we've had a catastrophe here, Tommy, so... Red flag. We're going to stop here.
There's a couple theories on why the airplane may have crashed. The first theory is there are some pictures floating around the internet that appear to show a piece of the airplane departing. Some people have indicated that may be an aileron. It's unclear exactly what piece it may be. If in fact there was a piece that flew from the aileron, that could have impacted the structural integrity of the airplane. It could have impacted the pilot's ability to maneuver the airplane, and that could have prevented the pilot from recovering from a dive that ended in the desert floor in a crash. The second theory is G loss of consciousness, or G-lock. The profile of the accident looks like a G-lock kind of a profile. And again, not saying that it was a G-lock, but it has that profile where the pilot sets a lift vector. The lift vector is a perpendicular line that comes out of the wings, perpendicular to the wings of the airplane, an imaginary line that indicates the direction of lift or the direction that the pilot is pulling the airplane. The pilot goes to the outside of the turn. It appears as if he sets his lift vector and then attempts to re-engage the race. From there, the turn releases or relaxes a little bit in a continuous descent into the crash. That is a common profile for a G-lock kind of an accident. So given that the factors could have been there, you can certainly, at the speeds the L-29 was flying in this race, he certainly would have had enough G authority for a G loss of consciousness or to put enough G on the aircraft to do that. What happens in a G loss of consciousness is when a pilot pulls Gs, the blood drains from a pilot's head down towards the feet. Pilots are taught a G straining maneuver to reduce the blood flow that comes from the head. But initially what happens is a pilot will achieve tunnel vision and then eventually go completely blind. At that point, you're still awake if the G onset is slow enough, but any more kind of G and you move into unconsciousness. It is possible to put enough G on the airplane fast enough that you pull through those stages and immediately go into G unconsciousness, and that's commonly called G-lock. So it's unknown whether or not that was the case here in this accident, but the profile of the accident descent certainly looks like that's what a G-lock accident looks like. So the NTSB will certainly look at structural failure, they'll look at other kinds of potential mechanical failures, and they'll assess the potential of G-lock as a cause of this accident. So let's talk about lessons learned that can come out of this accident, regardless of what the cause is and what the NTSB may find. The first one is, if there was some kind of structural failure, all of the aircraft that race in Reno go through inspections before every race. So these airplanes have a lot of stress put on them, especially the faster airplanes at the higher Gs, and the airplane would have gone through an inspection. Wake turbulence of any kind puts asymmetric forces on an airplane, and they are particularly stressful to an airplane. So if the airplane had undergone or gone through some wake turbulence, either from previous laps or from an aircraft in front of it, that kind of wake turbulence can be very disturbing to an airframe and particularly problematic. That's another thing that probably the NTSB will assess. And so understanding that wake turbulence and trying to stay out of wake turbulence, particularly when you're fast, particularly when you're at low altitude, again becomes a factor for us to consider, and the stress, the asymmetrical stress that puts on airframes. And then another lesson learned that comes out of this for anyone that flies aerobatics or experiences high Gs or low altitude flying, and really for all pilots, is conditioning, and the fact that G tolerance especially is highly susceptible to factors like hydration, nutrition, fatigue levels. Experience and proficiency levels can increase our G awareness, and even over the course of a day or a particular flight, with continuous onset of Gs, our G awareness or our G tolerance will be reduced. So pilots have to pay particular attention, especially in dry, high, hot climates, to stay hydrated, to use good nutrition habits, and to stay rested to continue to keep their G tolerance high, and to constantly be assessing their G tolerance. And then finally, it would be just the recognition that regardless of your training at speeds that they fly in the L-29 and other airplanes, you can pull so quickly and run through the typical awareness of G tolerance and go right to the unconscious level if you're not careful. Thanks for watching.